I lived in a peaceful home till things changed. My name is Nancy, and I was raised in what I thought was the perfect family. My dad was the provider, strong, hardworking, and always there for me. My mom, warm and nurturing, kept everything in order, from the meals we ate to the love that bound us together. They seemed like a perfect match, a pair that defied the odds of modern relationships. Growing up, I looked up to my dad. He was my hero. When I was younger, I would follow him around the house, helping with little things, car repairs, lawn mowing, or even the odd DIY project he loved to start but never quite finished. As I grew older, our bond remained strong, but it started to take a different form. There were more personal conversations, deeper than the surface-level banter we used to share. We talked about everything: life, his dreams, my future, and sometimes things that felt a little too personal for a father-daughter relationship. But I didn't see it as strange. Dad was just someone I could confide in. He was always there for me, even when Mom was busy or too tired to listen. We had this connection that was different from what I had with her. And I didn't think much of it, until one day I noticed something odd. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon. My mom had gone to visit a friend, leaving Dad and me alone in the house. Nothing unusual about that. We had spent time alone before. But something about that day felt different. The way he looked at me, the way he smiled when he talked. It was almost as if he was seeing me not just as his daughter, but as something more. At first, I shrugged it off, convincing myself it was just my imagination. After all, Dad had never been anything but kind and caring. But as the days went on, little things started to add up. The way he'd brush my hair away from my face when I talked to him, how his hugs lingered a second longer than they should have, or how he seemed to be seeking my company more and more. It wasn't overt, and nothing inappropriate ever happened. But there was this tension between us that I couldn't quite explain. It was subtle, but undeniable. I started to wonder if maybe I was overthinking things. Perhaps I was just imagining this strange new dynamic. Still, part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. And soon enough, it became clear that I wasn't the only one noticing these changes. My mom had started acting differently too. She became more distant, watching us carefully when Dad and I would talk or share a laugh. I could see the suspicion growing in her eyes, but I refused to believe that anything was wrong. Yet, the atmosphere in our house was changing. The once warm and loving environment was becoming tense, filled with unspoken words and lingering stares. And though I wanted to keep things normal, I felt like I was stuck in the middle of something I didn't fully understand. As weeks passed, the tension in our house thickened. My mom's distant stares turned into cold silences, and my dad seemed increasingly drawn to me in ways that were hard to define. It was small, almost imperceptible gestures, like him standing a little too close when we talked, or how he'd find excuses to be around me, even when there was no real need. It made me uncomfortable, but I kept pushing the feelings aside. After all, this was my dad. He would never cross any lines, right? One evening, after dinner, my mom abruptly stood up and announced she was going out. It wasn't like her to leave without telling us where she was going, but neither my dad nor I questioned it. As soon as the door closed behind her, I noticed the change in Dad's demeanor. He seemed relieved, almost excited, and he suggested we watch a movie together. I tried to act normal, but something about being alone with him now felt different. Like there was an invisible line between us that was gradually being erased. As we sat on the couch, the movie playing in the background, I could feel his eyes on me. Not in the way a father usually watches his daughter, but in a way that made me feel self-conscious. My heart raced, though I didn't know why. I kept my eyes glued to the screen, trying to ignore the growing discomfort in the room. Suddenly, Dad leaned over and placed his hand on my shoulder. It was an innocent enough gesture, but it felt heavy. His hand lingered, and I could feel the warmth of his touch seeping through my skin. I stiffened, unsure of how to react. He didn't move his hand, and instead, he turned toward me, his face closer than it had ever been before. "Nancy," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "You know I'm always here for you, right?" You can talk to me about anything. I nodded, but my throat felt tight. Something about the way he said it felt different. I wanted to believe he was just being the supportive dad I'd always known, but deep down, a part of me wasn't so sure anymore. Is everything okay? I asked, hoping to steer the conversation back to normalcy. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes searching mine, as if he was trying to decide something. And then, just as quickly as the tension had built, he pulled his hand away and smiled. A smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Of course, everything's fine, he said, standing up abruptly. I'm going to check on something in the garage. As he left the room, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My mind was racing. Was I imagining things? Was I reading too much into innocent moments? I shook my head, trying to dispel the doubts clouding my thoughts. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't ignore the way my body reacted whenever he was near, or the strange sensation that we were teetering on the edge of something that wasn't right. That night, as I lay in bed, I found myself replaying the events of the evening over and over in my mind. I didn't want to believe that anything inappropriate was happening. After all, Dad hadn't done anything, at least nothing overt. But the feeling in my gut told me that something was changing, and it wasn't for the better. The next morning, Mom was even more distant. She barely spoke to Dad, and her conversations with me were short and clipped. It was as if she knew something but wasn't ready to confront it. I caught her watching me out of the corner of her eye, her face tense with unspoken questions. Days passed, and the growing distance between my parents became more apparent. They spoke less, barely touching or showing any affection. The house, once full of laughter and light, felt like it was closing in on itself. The cracks in their relationship were widening, and I had no idea how to stop it. Then, one afternoon, my mom approached me while Dad was at work. Her face was tight with worry, and her voice was uncharacteristically soft. "Nancy," she began, hesitating for a moment. "Has anything been going on between you and your father? Anything strange?" I froze. Her question was like a punch to the gut. Was she accusing me of something? Did she think I was doing something wrong? My mind raced as I tried to find the right words. "No, Mom, nothing's going on," I said quickly, though I wasn't sure if that was entirely true. Nothing had happened, but something was definitely off, and we both knew it. She looked at me for a long time, as if trying to gauge whether I was telling the truth. Finally, she sighed and nodded, but her expression told me she wasn't entirely convinced. "Okay," she said quietly. I just wanted to make sure." As she walked away, a heavy weight settled in my chest. The cracks in our family were no longer just beneath the surface. They were right there in plain sight, threatening to tear us apart. And deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was coming. The days that followed my mom's quiet confrontation felt like living in a pressure cooker. My dad grew even more attentive, his presence suffocating, and my mom's distance turned into outright avoidance. We were no longer a family. We were three strangers in a house full of unspoken words and unseen barriers. I was stuck between them, feeling torn by the weight of my father's behavior and my mother's silent accusations. Then, one evening, everything came crashing down. It was late, long past dinner, and I had already gone to bed when I heard my parents talking in hushed, angry voices in the living room. At first, I tried to ignore it, pulling the covers over my head, hoping their argument would pass like it always did. But the tension in their voices kept pulling me in, making my stomach knot with dread. I slipped out of bed and tiptoed to my bedroom door, cracking it open just enough to hear what was being said. Their voices were clearer now, sharp and cutting through the stillness of the night. "You think I don't see what's going on?" My mom's voice was cold, but her anger trembled underneath. "The way you've been acting around her, the way you've been avoiding me. Do you think I'm blind?" "Linda, stop it. You're blowing things out of proportion," my dad responded, his voice calmer but defensive. "She's our daughter. Nothing's happening." Don't lie to me, Richard. My mom shot back, her voice shaking with fury. I see how you look at her, and I've seen how she looks at you too. My heart sank. Did she think I was part of this? That I wanted any of this? I would never hurt her, Dad insisted, his voice suddenly soft, almost pleading. You know me. I love her, but it's not like that. Not like that? My mom's voice cracked. I don't know you anymore. And I don't know what's been going on between you two, but it's not normal and it's not right. I could hear the tears in her voice now, and my chest tightened. This was it. This was the moment when everything was falling apart. I knew I had to stop it before it got worse. Without thinking, I stepped out of my room and walked down the hallway toward the living room. As I approached, both of them turned to look at me, startled, their faces frozen in a mix of guilt and surprise. Mom, Dad, stop, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but it cut through the tension like a knife. Nothing has happened. Dad hasn't done anything, and neither have I. My mom's eyes narrowed, filled with suspicion and pain. But you know something's wrong, don't you, Nancy? You felt it too. I hesitated, and that hesitation seemed to confirm her worst fears. I could see the betrayal in her eyes, and it hurt me in a way I hadn't anticipated. I don't know what's happening, I admitted, my voice shaking. But it's not what you think. Dad and I were just... I paused, searching for the right words, but they wouldn't come. My dad stood there, silent, as if he knew there was no way to fix this. His face was pale, his eyes hollow with regret. He looked like a man who had lost everything without realizing he was losing it. Mom stepped closer to me, her voice trembling with emotion. Nancy, I love you, but I can't ignore what I've seen. There's something between you two that shouldn't be there. It's not your fault, but it's not okay either. Tears welled up in my eyes. I didn't mean for this to happen. I don't even know what's happening. And that was the truth. Whatever strange connection had grown between my father and me, I hadn't asked for it. I hadn't wanted it. But now it was destroying everything. For the first time that night, Dad spoke. Linda, please, I never meant for any of this. I love you, I love both of you. But things have been off, and I don't know how we got here. My mom shook her head, her voice steady but broken. It's too late, Richard. I can't trust you anymore. I can't trust this family anymore. Her words hung in the air like a final judgment. The weight of it all crashed down around us, and I felt like I was suffocating under the pressure of a reality I didn't fully understand. In the days that followed, my mom packed her bags and left the house. She didn't say goodbye, didn't even look back. It was as if she had already mourned the loss of our family long before she walked out the door. My dad tried to apologize, tried to explain, but there was nothing left to say. The damage had been done, and no amount of words could fix the broken pieces of our lives. I stayed with my dad for a while after that, but things were never the same. The unspoken tension that had lingered between us for months was now a permanent fixture, a reminder of the invisible line that had been crossed, even if neither of us fully understood how or why. Eventually, I moved out, desperate to escape the weight of the past. My relationship with my dad remained strained, and my mom, well, she never really forgave me, or him, or the situation. Our once peaceful home was gone, replaced by a silence that spoke louder than any argument ever could. And in that silence, I realized that sometimes the things that destroy a family aren't the loud, obvious betrayals. Sometimes it's the quiet, subtle cracks that go unnoticed until it's too late to repair them. Years passed, and though the pain of what happened dulled over time, it never fully went away. My parents divorced, and I found myself caught in the middle of a rift that could never be healed. I tried to move on, to build my own life away from the shadows of that broken home. But every now and then, I'd catch myself thinking back to those moments, the unspoken tension, the things left unsaid, and wonder if there was something I could have done differently. I never spoke to my dad about that night again. We still talk, of course, but there's a distance between us now that can never be bridged. My mom remarried, and though we're on speaking terms, our relationship is still marked by that lingering suspicion, that sense of betrayal that never quite faded. In the end, our family fell apart not because of a scandalous affair or a blatant betrayal, but because of the quiet erosion of trust. The boundaries between us blurred, and in that space, something was lost. Something we could never get back. And that, perhaps, is the real tragedy of it all. Not the affair that never happened, but the love that we couldn't hold on to.